Welcome back to another episode of the Heroes Veritas podcast. I'm your host, Tim Bass, and today I'm very excited to have Tony Whatley, business executive coach. He runs 365 Driven, a group who does destination experiences as well as business and life coaching. He's also a best-selling author of Hustle Millionaire, and I'm extremely excited personally because I followed his journey for the better part of the last several years. After running across him in the RT Accelerator that is run by Ed Milet and Andy Frisella. So Tony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Tim, thanks for the opportunity, man. I can't wait to rattle these microphones with you, brother.
Oh man, it's going to be going to the heavens, and I guarantee that. So anybody that's tuning in, be sure to strap up because this guy brings a lot of wealth and knowledge, and we align very heavily. And we love the sound of high RPM muscle cars. So excuse me, I've been talking a lot the last several days, having my first public webinar, and so my throat needs a little bit of liquidation from here and there. So I appreciate you being patient with that. So Tony, you've been in business for several years, very successful. You've been on the stages with the likes of Ed Milet and Andy Frisella. You've shook hands and been around people that have been extremely, extremely successful. And you yourself have been extremely successful. One of the things that has always really stood out to me is the way you comport yourself in that space. You're very down to earth, you're very easy spoken, you're very calm, and yet you succeed in a space with personalities like Andy and Sean, who are very boisterous and demonstrative by nature. Mm-hmm. What do you feel is kind of your take on that? Like, how do you find yourself molding into that space, being of such polar opposites in the way you comport yourself from those type of individuals?
Man, I would say it's a learned behavior. I've always been kind of chill, pretty calm, good at assessing things before I make any kind of decisions or reactions or responses is the right word. I would say that for me, going back, if I were to look back on the internet and the first company I sold, I've been in business 21 years now, but the first company that I sold for millions, I was age 34. And I would say that at age 34, I'm almost 50 now. So, 16 years ago, man, I think that I was more loud and I was more trying to prove something or doing what we call the internet flex nowadays. I mean, I literally would put 10 cars on the driveway and climb up on a giant step ladder and take a photo of them with a wide angle lens just to kind of show like the people in the communities that I'd built, like, this is what I've built. And, I was really seeking validation. I was someone who grew up without money. And I just thought that, hey, this is what you're supposed to do when you become successful. So I was a little bit more immature, right, around money and success. I wouldn't say I let it get to my head, but I just felt that this is how I have to do things or showcase things in order to feel like I belong or I've arrived at that level, whatever we wanted to define, right? So that's why I don't like to be a hypocrite when I call out other people doing the flex and doing that kind of stuff, because what it really means for most people is that they just haven't been rich or successful very long. It's like they're new to money. And most people eventually, when they stay wealthy long enough, they don't lose it all. They'll look back on this and realize, like, man, I was kind of a douchebag when I first got successful, because they're going through the same insecurities and trying to validate themselves that most of us do. Now, even example, like you mentioned Ed Milet, even Ed, he and I are friends. He's not the same as he was when he first hit the scene. I mean, when he first hit the scene, he was showing the jets and all the cars and then the watches and like all of his houses. And he knew that that was kind of showboating, but that was even the cover of his podcast for a while. Like, probably the first 2 years was like him standing in front of a jet with an exotic car or something, showing muscle. Nowadays, if you go look at his podcast arts, it's him sitting in a sweater on a rock on the beach, very like grounded. And it's because he had to do that work internally to realize, like, I don't have to do all this. I have all this stuff. I don't have to show it all the time in order to make my message more impactful. So again, even him, at someone at his high net worth, is still evolving and understanding that, dude, the flex is just the beginner level stuff.
And that triggers a question in my mind. And this is something that, I've been in RTA in the past, and I tend to move between grouping coaching groups yearly almost, just because I love collecting knowledge.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've noticed is that kind of story arc for most of the mentors that I've worked with, where they come on the scene, they get that success, and they're usually driven by, to your point, never having that success. And so that level of accomplishment is something they're very proud of.
Mhm.
And so they come on the scene and they do the internet flex. And then a few years goes by and they switch to the sweater in front of a rock, right? Where they're very much like, okay,
Yeah.
money's cool and the success is gone, in the sense of like the novelty of success, right?
Yeah.
But the maturity of, what they teach is more like, you need to start being a good human. What are you doing with that money? What are you doing with your family? I saw that a lot with Ed.
Yes.
If you watch his journey, he went from, you need to be helping people from the insurance side and the real estate side and really pushing for the success, to later years, his communication style was more like, hey, it's about the time you spend with your people and the time you spend with your family. And I was wondering, do you think, with your experience, I'd love to hear your input on this. Do you think that that's a necessity for that success to go through that arc? Or do you think that people can skip that flex phase in order and still reach that level of success and still, or is it something that they have to experience in order to truly understand?
I would say for the vast majority of people, they're probably still going to have to go through some kind of phase where they seek validation or external validation, especially those people who aren't working with a psychologist or a doctor or a coach or someone that they can actually bounce these kind of thoughts back and forth off of, because a lot of this is just internal processing, and you're going to seek this externally if you're not getting it with a one-on-one in-depth conversation with somebody. And so, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just think that most people just burn through their money and then they can't do it anymore. They can't flex anymore, or they finally gain some awareness and wisdom with age and they realize, like, I don't need to do that. I'm not trying to validate myself anymore. I have that stuff. And by all means, listeners, I want you to go out there and earn as much as possible and become as successful as you, whatever you define that is. But what I also learned is that don't trade your happiness or your fulfillment in order to do so. And be careful who you listen to on the advice, because yeah, while I agree that there's certain times in our life that we have to do everything we can to go get what we want and go all in and work crazy hours once in a while, what I don't like is, like, there's some of these false prophets that I look out there that are always telling you that they got to work 24/7 and they only want to sleep 4 hours a night and they only want to do this, but that becomes their norm. They do this their entire life, and that's not healthy. And you'll find that the highest performers still get their 8 hours of sleep. They still have time to get their fitness in. They still eat healthy. They still have time for their family. So don't listen to the people that are always bragging about how many hours they work or how many companies they own and stuff like that, because that's not realistic. And actually, when you're working like that kind of schedule, it really just means you're inefficient or you're really not good at what you do, despite what your financial success looks like.
Yeah, I would say that the people that I've come across that are in that state historically, if they are successful, it's either short-lived,
Yeah.
or the reason they're successful is because they're pulling up themselves by the bootstraps through that busy expansion, to where they're busy, they're not productive.
Mhm.
And so they could be so much more successful if they could learn the systems and create some efficiencies, as opposed to just, not sleeping or whatever the case is, to make that happen. And to your point, everyone that I've come across in my limited experience has burnt out, and they either learn that that's not the way to do it, or they have massive health scares, that really turn them on to, you know a new way of doing things. I mean, I had that. I had that massive healthcare. I was listening to gurus that were like, you need to be working this amount of hours. If you're not waking up early and going to bed late, and so on and so forth. And that was just me at the start of my
Yeah.
entrepreneurial journey, and trying to do that. And I made it about a year and a half doing that, literally burning the candle at both ends, holding a full-time job, plus being a personal trainer, plus starting an apparel business, plus. Like, I was very dedicated, and it was all in the same vein, but I was always moving and doing something. And it ultimately burnt me out to the point where I ended up in the hospital. And I call it it was my mental breakdown, but it came to fruition in the form of a physical repercussion to where I was having blurry vision. I couldn't breathe. I was having panic attacks that I had never had before. And so
Yeah.
I now understand the mechanisms for systemization. And so I do more with less time now because I focus on brass tacks efficiencies rather than just being able to say, oh, I did this many things in a day. I went to these many meetings. I talked to these many people. I woke up at, 4 and went to bed at 3. And, it's not about that. It's about what did you do in that time? What did you actually accomplish in that time? And I'm really glad that you were able to share that with our audience, because I think from your level of success, that's going to resonate a lot higher than if I was to just be out here saying that.
Yeah. To me, dude, it's people getting into this entrepreneur or personal development space, and they're starting to get into it. They're starting to listen to podcasts or read books. They start to come across people like myself and a lot of the names that you mentioned. And the thing is the ones that are always telling you to do the hustle and grind tend to be the loudest vocal voices. And when you're going into that space looking for change, you think that they have to have the right answer because they're the loudest ones in the space. But it's not necessarily true, because you'll find that there's a lot of other people who are the complete opposite, have equal success, but they're not just focusing on the hours put in. And here's the mentality, because I grew up lower middle class, blue collar background. I put myself through engineering school as a welder, a pipe fitter, waiting tables, a car mechanic. So, really hands dirty type career for first 20 years of my life, 25 years of my life. And when I remember sitting in those lunch rooms or lunch shacks, if they're outside like a welding shack, I always think about the character that exists at every job site. And I call him the Bubba, because that usually was their nickname. It's like Bubba. They always have the belt buckle that says Bubba. They got the sticker on the back of their truck that says Bubba. And here's the thing about really is misleading why we start to value like putting in crazy hours, because Bubba was usually the 45, 50-year-old guy that had the dually that we all wanted, had the side by side, had the jet skis, a little bit nicer house, fancier boots. And he was always bragging about how many OT hours he was crushing. He was just always bragging about, picked up this shift and I'm working hard. I'm super hard. But when you're young and you're in your 20s and you're impressionable, you see this and you aspire to have all the cool things that Bubba has. But what you realize is that hourly wise, he's not making a whole lot much more than you, but he's 30 years ahead of you collecting money and saving his money. So you think mentally that, hey, if I go trade more units of time for units of dollars and I pick up overtime or I get a second job or a third job, or I just keep stacking all these things, trading my time, you think that's the way to get what Bubba has. And that's one way, but that's the wrong way, because we start to value that money is more important than time. And then when you get to have some health scare like you, or a near-death racing experience like me in cars, you start to realize that time is actually more valuable than money. And the whole phrase of time is money and money is time is total bullshit that most people perpetuate, because they don't understand that no, money is just money and time is just time. They're actually independent of each other. And the successful people have purely learned how to make money regardless of time. You and I are on this call. We're very focused in this moment. In the background, I'm still earning money. I'm not on a clock somewhere. There's money coming in. So money is made regardless of time. And the more that you start to understand that you can create businesses or processes or systems or automations that create money or investments, you realize that I don't have to trade my units of time for units of dollar anymore. And that really opens you up to a lot of freedom that you've never experienced before, because you're always compensated on being somewhere and clocking in and clocking out.
Yeah, and I love and it's been a couple of years since I read your book, Side Hustle Millionaire, but you talked about the units of time in there as well, and the trade and the prioritization is a different scale when you realize that you can simultaneously earn money on the same minute, on the same unit of time. And I think that was a big aha moment for me reading your book and following you for a while, is realizing that I am one person, but if you build enough systems, you can simultaneously be in multiple places, adding value in multiple places and developing wealth within those places, while you're still, like you said, in this moment, we're prioritizing this podcast. We're having a very direct and focused conversation. But meanwhile, things are over here working simultaneously on my behalf and on your behalf. And I think, that leads me to something that's frustrated me, especially early on in my self-improvement, entrepreneurial stuff, is something you just said that can frustrate others and has definitely frustrated me, is when people hit that level of success and they start understanding that unit of time and simultaneous development of value and development of money flow, cash flow, you'll hear this phrase, money's not that important, or money's not that hard. Money's very easy to get. And when you're new to that space, especially when I would get so frustrated with my mentors who would tell me that, because I grew up very similar, very low middle class, very blue collar. My dad was a mechanic. It was just, that was what I knew. And, getting into my day job, my normal day job, it's in the utility field. So I'm around linemen, I'm around, gas operators, I'm around these guys that are very blue collar. Same concept as Bubba's. Like, they got the boats, they got the ATVs, they got the nice house.
So a Bubba or two.
I know a Bubba or two. And I used to aspire to be them, and they would do the same thing. They, I picked up this OT shift. I worked all the way through the holidays. I didn't even go home for Christmas.
Yep.
And that was why when I got out of the military, I chose not to be a law enforcement officer. Family is super important to me. And so when I went and I interviewed and I got accepted and we did all the things, they're like, well, as a rookie, you're going to get the short end of the shifts, right? You're going to work every holiday. You're going to be working grave. You're going to be, and I immediately went, whoa, I didn't think about that. And when they said, you're not going to see your family on those days, you're going to have to figure out, I was like, no, I'm going to go find something in the corporate world where it's, my time is more important and I can do that. And so, that idea of like, money isn't that important, time is important, I think because as a coach, right, you're just sharing what's in that moment. But as a person myself, and I know others in the same boat, could you possibly share some wisdom around mitigating that frustration of like, or money is important to me right now because I don't have any, right? And how do you make that mental shift to realize that time is very important? Like you said, without the life or death potential of a car accident or, a mental breakdown, so that we can help some of the people listening avoid going through those hoops and jumps if they can avoid it.
Well, I think the most important thing to understand about making more money, it's not an instantaneous thing. It's not like some switch you can flip on and all of a sudden money starts falling in your lap. You're not going to go create a click funnel and then put it on there, build a website, and all these people are just going to start showing up to it. Like, a lot of people have this misconception about making money, and it's a mindset shift really for me, because whatever situation you're currently in, whether that's financial, socioeconomic, whatever situation you're currently in, realize that that was a result of decisions you made years ago that led you to here. If you're the kind of person that will take full accountability outside of acts of God or, crazy accidents or really strange stuff, right? Everything that we are in this moment is a result of decisions we made years ago. And if you can accept that, you also understand that if you want a better life, then you actually are in full control of that, because the decisions you start making today will lead to that result. So take accountability for the past and accept it and realize, like, okay, that's my past story. It's not how I define myself or my limitations by any means, but I also get excited because I get to control where I'm going to go. So that's the first mindset shift. Now, understanding where you want to go, you got to think about, if you want to think about a financial number, whatever the 100,000 a year, 500,000 a year, a million, whatever that number is, you can always work backwards from those goals. But you also have to learn the skill sets. And that's where most people fail, because they look at the skills they currently have and they see those as a limitation, rather than start to think about, what am I willing to learn? What am I willing to invest in? What am I willing to go do and become more proficient at, to be able to get a higher level of compensation? I mean, literally increasing your value to society is going to increase your income. So, for me, when I was broke and trying to figure things out, and like you, I was doing side hustles, I said, okay, people need websites. There's a lot of companies, a lot of people that want to be on the internet, but they don't know how to do that. I'm willing to go learn that. I bought books because this was all before Google and before YouTube. I literally had to go to the bookstore and buy books and teach myself how to use browsers and Notepad to code websites. And I said, well, shit, I still got to hire a graphic designer, and I don't know how to do those, but maybe I can teach myself Photoshop and do some really simple graphic design. So I bought a book on Photoshop and I would just practice. So when I got home from my crap ass job, I would just practice these things probably 2-3 hours, and I got better and better. And I finally started having people that were paying me to do it. And I started to improve, and I was able to hire a few other people to help me and do those and grow those. So And then it became like, well, I need some good photos, and got tired of hiring photographers, and because they had the fancy gear, I didn't have that. Like everybody's got nice cameras now. Our iPhones are literally better than the DSLRs from 10 years ago. Like you have no excuses now, hardware wise or technology wise, like we did 20 years ago. But the fact remains is so many people are not willing to invest to become experts in those things so that they can become higher compensated. So I've always been the type of person that what skill do I have a vague interest in that could potentially earn more money or pad what I'm currently making? And am I willing to go do that, invest time and money to become that? And the answer for me was always yes. So while I kind of graduated from getting second and third jobs, I just started adding second and third skills, and those became the base and the foundation of things that became successful later on.
Yeah, I love that. And especially because you just mentioned something right there at the end that I think is really critical is there's a graduation from the thought process where most people see it as, oh, if I need more income, I go find a new job, a new
Yes.
clock to punch, whether it's an additional or a new job with the same punching of the clock, that graduation into, okay, well, if I take that away and I just look for a skill set that I can sell upon, that I can add value with, that somebody will trade their time and money for my time to do this thing, that's going to exponentially grow your earning potential than just going to somebody else who has a fixed position that says, this is how much you earn in this time. No matter how hard you work, no matter how many things you do for them, that's how much you make. As the flip side of like, well, I have a skill. So if I build 5 websites, I'm going to make 5 times more money than if then I went and got a job making websites for a company paying me hourly.
That's right.
And that is a very, kind of an aha moment for me listening to you talk, is like, that's what I went through, right? When I was struggling for money, I was like, oh, well, I have all these skills. I'm going to go get a second and third and fourth job. And that's when I was like, yeah, but then I'm just fixed hours. I don't like that I'm scheduled to be there at a certain time to do the certain thing. And I can make no more money once I'm there. I'm kind of locked in. Or I can sell a coaching program and help people with their confidence, or I can build websites. And I did the same thing. I learned Photoshop and I started learning how to do graphic design. I started selling random things. The potential for earning is higher with less overhead. And then you get to choose when to turn that skill on,
Right.
but it's always in your toolbox. You don't always have to pull it out, but it's always in the toolbox.
I
And
mean,
the other thing that I wanted to touch on real quick is something that you said is money is equal to the value you bring to the market. And this is something that in later years, or in the last couple of years for me, has really become an awareness piece of mine, is most people look at business and their function is to make money in their mind. And the reality is businesses, their function isn't to make money. Their function is to provide a service or a solution to a problem that the customer that they're looking to serve has. The money is a byproduct of the quality and the level of solution that you bring to the table. And so when you said that, I wanted to highlight that for the people listening, because if you focus on solutioning and focus on service to your fellow man, and the money, to your point, isn't going to just start raining from the heavens and it's going to be all at once, but you're going to be able to add, slowly trickle, and then all of a sudden hockey stick mentality will just spike up because you've added enough value, you've added enough service and solutions to where now your name is out there and now you can trade for that experience.
Yeah, I think that, let's talk real dollars so people can see this is just not abstract. I mean, website designer, pretty common nowadays, but even if you're a beginner website and you're just doing something like Shopify websites or really simple WordPress templates that are already pre-designed, and you're really just typing in text and dragging photos and making things work. I mean, a decent website at the beginner level is like $1,000, and if you're good at what you do, they're $5,000-$6,000 for a website. So that's something you could literally go learn in 30 days. You can literally go learn how to build a really simple website on Shopify or WordPress in 30 days if you just spend a few hours a day learning it. And then you could charge $1,000 per website, which only takes you about a day to build. If you really want to think about that, if you really focus, you could build a really simple website in one day and make $1,000. So that's just real numbers. Now, another one that's like podcast editors. You and I both have shows. Podcast editors just listen to episodes. They put the music in the beginning. They put the call to action and the music at the end. They listen to all the noise. They try to make the sound a little bit cleaner. So kind of a sound engineer, but also they remove dead space in between, like 3 seconds or longer of dead space. They just crop it out, right? It's easy work. I mean, super simple work. But those podcast editors still make 150 an hour, 200 an hour. And if they can get enough clients, you can see how this is a full-time job that they could be making 150 to $200 an hour listening to shows that they probably already enjoy listening to and just making them sound better and publishing those on the host. So these are very simple things. And that doesn't require a certification. That doesn't require an education or degree. I mean, literally, there's a lot of these different things that are online services that people need that could be making $100 an hour. So it kills me when I see my friends out there, trying to get like $25, $30 an hour jobs. I'm like, dude, you could be working in the air condition at your house in your pajamas at midnight if you want to, doing podcast editing.
And the beauty of that is you could even select which podcast you will work on based on your interest in the topic.
That's right.
And you get to control which ones you listen to. So to your point, what do you think stops people? Because when you put it in terms like that, right, it sounds like a pretty slam dunk, easy decision, right? You get to make your hours, choose your thing, decide how much, and then you can make upwards of an income for 30 days worth of learning, a couple hours a day for 30 days. And now you can go and claim you know that stuff and you can go and build that. What do you think stops people from taking that path?
I think it's just lack of belief. I mean, a story I'd share is I was at a dinner table with some relatives, and one of my relatives is a school teacher, and she was talking about how hard things were, and she's having to go all this thing, and she's getting up to the more of the administrative level in public schools, and it's just a lot of red tape and bureaucracy and politics and just nonsense. And I looked at her and said, do you mind telling me, like, what do you earn per year? And she said 70,000 a year, and she's my age, she's 70,000 a year. I said, wow. And I'm thinking to myself, I can make that in a weekend by doing a product launch or an event. I can make that in a weekend. And I didn't tell her that because when you say something like that to someone that's making that much money, they don't believe it, first of all, and they don't see it's even real. They can't even fathom that somebody in 2 days can make what they struggle to make an entire year. And so I think it's a lack of belief, and it's because they're not surrounding themselves with enough people that actually think like we do. And the other thing is that when you look at your friend circle and you just bitch and moan about your job and you complain about life and how the man's holding you down, all you do guys do is validate each other and feed each other the same bullshit excuses. It's like playing tennis with a bullshit excuse. Like they serve you the excuse. You go, yeah, man, me too. And you serve it back and you go, yeah, man, me too. I got no time to go get fit. I mean, I'm large and in charge, but I'm there, man. I'm cool. And they serve that one back over. Yeah, man, me too. I'm a fat bastard myself. And, I can't ever have time to start that company. And so you got these excuses getting served back and forth. And so neither of you guys are ever going to break out of the mentality of thinking about what's actually possible. So to answer your question, dude, it's belief. I think they just don't believe what's possible. One, because they're around the wrong people. And two, they've never even spent a minute learning that it's things that you could do to make it possible.
Yeah, Mark Evans actually helped me break my own glass ceiling in that space because he was very blunt with me when I sat down with and talked with him. And he's like, dude, you're king of the dipshits, man. He's like, you're really good at what you do in your space, but you're afraid to get into the room with the big dogs because you're afraid you're going to get eaten up. And he's like, but at the end of the day, do you want to die king of the dipshits, or do you want to get out of that and find out what's possible and be around the people that really want to see you win? Because the reality is when you get at the right table, people want to see you win just because it's another player at the table to bring more opportunities to make more money with, to be around and have deeper conversations with.
Mm-hmm.
And that belief was such a critical component, and that's one of the reasons I personally started doing self-respect and confidence coaching is that's something I've never really had to go and seek. My dad built that in me very young, like pride in your decisions, not arrogance, but having ability to audit.
Certainty, confidence.
Yeah, that discernment of like, I know where I'm going. I know what I got to do to get it done. And, to your point earlier, taking responsibility. Yeah, I made those decisions. This is where it led me, but now I can audit and I can go a different direction or I can micro adjust. And talking to Mark Evans, it became very apparent that at the time I was surrounding myself with people that were stroking that ego and made me feel like, yeah, I'm cock of the walk here. And, I'm tough and I'm big and bad or whatever. But all that did was hold me at that level. And I never was able to get past that until I started thinking like that, and like, okay, well, I don't want to be that. I want to be the lowest rung in the pole in the room. I'd never be the smartest person in the room. We've heard that before. And that really exponentially made my leadership with my team grow. Me believe that I could be the CEO of my own company, me believe that I can develop these programs and these systems to really truly add value to the space and let people grow. And to your point, being around the wrong people or not getting around people that will challenge you to believe bigger is one of the greatest hurdles that we have in today's society, because humans really are capable of some amazing things if they are willing to believe it's possible.
Dude, a lot of the problems that we see around achieving potential and success is just based in ego, negative side of ego. Because what you talked about, a lot of these guys want to be the Bubba of the lunchroom. They want to be the King Dick of the small pond, right? So they're unwilling to step to that next level. One, because they don't have the confidence, and probably they're always at that top of that level they're at, and they're hoping that people don't find out they're kind of fraud or a fake. A lot of times people get to a level they just feel like they didn't deserve, they overshot their own personal goals, and they're like, "Oh, I'm just glad to be here. Hope nobody figures me out." Right? They kind of feel like that. Say imposter syndrome. We all get it at every level, right? But they're not willing to go challenge themselves to get into that room that's gonna, like you said, bigger fish that's going to raise them, because they're comfortable at that level. They've got a certain amount of income, they've got toys, and they got the respect of all the peers that just don't understand any better. So ego is one of the things that holds most people back, because I see a lot of times people have this death grip on what they have currently in their possession, whether that's material objects or a job or a title or status, and they're unwilling to go backwards. And sometimes the right move is backwards. Just like when you look at chess, sometimes the right move is moving a piece backwards. It's not always going on offense and moving forward. So what are you willing to sacrifice to go get what you truly want? And I get a good example of that. I'm a coach and I have masterminds and I've got these events. And sometimes people will hit me up like, "Hey, man, I want to work with you." And then you tell them how much the investment is. And they're like, "Oh, man, I don't think I can make that work right now, but I'll get back with you. I'll get back with you." I'm like, "Cool, man. I'm not going to judge." It's like, "Cool." And then you watch them online and they're buying stupid shit. They're buying new boats or a fancy car. And you see them 2 years down the road, they're in the exact same situation that they were 2 years ago, because they were doing stupid shit. They weren't really investing and trying to get ahead. So it was all talk. And I don't have time for those people, because I realize that everybody talks big, but very few people are willing to figure things out. And I've learned in my life from my own self that if I want something bad enough, I'm going to figure out how to afford it. I will figure it out. I will go sell things. I will go get new skills. I will do things to get what I want. And the people that win are like that. They will figure it out.
I want to unpack a couple of things that you said there that really, well, me personally, I've gone through that ego. I've had to deal with that darker side of my ego. You know, it became an identity, right? The checklist, the nice house, the nice cars, the good job, right? Like it became an identity, and that ego was very attached to that identity. And when I decided I wanted to chase heroes and I wanted to make sure that this dream became a reality, I had to come to some really deep understanding. Like I had a BMW, I had a nice place to stay. And I was like, dude, I'm spending X amount of dollars on this car and it's doing nothing but making me feel somewhat good that I'm driving a nice car. I don't need this.
Mhm.
But to relinquish that for me, because that was, growing up poor, growing up,
Dude,
lower middle class, I was like, I can't let it go because then I'm a failure.
you lower your status, you lower your perceived status is the way you do that. And we keep a death grip on that shit that at the end of the day, it doesn't even fucking matter. It's an internal validation thing that we fall into. And as men, most of us have a real problem just asking for help. We have a real problem. And we
Yeah.
want to be stoic and we want to be like, we got our shit together, and we're really hurting inside sometimes. And we're just unwilling to ask for help. And we're conditioned that way as kids, man. It's our parents raise us that way. When we're kids, we fall down. They say, "Oh, you're a tough kid. Like, don't cry. Boys don't cry. You
Yeah.
just rub it off." Like that's the kind of shit we're conditioned to believe our entire life. So we're not gonna ask for help. We're gonna act tougher than we really are.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that also limits our potential, because we're not willing to move backwards and get rid of shit and figure out that, man, none of that stuff even matters. And if things work out, I'll be able to go buy 10 times that stuff later. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thought you have to have. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice to go get what you truly want?
That's a delayed gratification piece that we,
That's
that
right.
a lot of people don't want anymore. I mean, we've been conditioned, to your point, to just be like, this is what I want right now. And the other thing that I wanted to unpack was, you mentioned about, we get into this space where we get comfortable and we don't know where to go from there because we already got everything that we wanted, but now we don't know where we're at, right? And I hit that mark in my mid-20s when I first started making six figures. I grew up very poor. My parents, I remember at one point, my mom told me that together my parents made $48,000 a year.
Yeah.
So I made it up in my mind that my life goal was going to be $52,000 by myself a year. And I thought, man, that'll make me cock of the walk. I'll be, rolling in it, because if they did that together, I'll be able to do it. And it was a perspective shift when I hit six figures and I'm in uncharted territory. And I'm like, there's no way that I'm supposed to be here right now. And that imposter syndrome really crept up. Whereas like that fear of being found out, right? I'm not as good as I thought I was. I'm not as smart. I'm not as good at it. I'm not as skilled. Maybe I'm not supposed to be here. And I was truly terrified when I was in those circles of people that are, making seven figures, eight figures, nine figures. I'd walk into those rooms and I'm a very confident guy, but I was a duck on the pond, man. Inside, I'm like, these guys are going to find out I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And what I actually found out is I put myself in those situations and most of them felt the same way, just at different levels.
That's
And
it.
so, to that point, it made it easier and easier surrounding myself with people that made me feel uncomfortable to relinquish that identity and realize life is a game that can only be played. It can't be won, man. So like, there's levels to everything. And you're constantly if you're doing it right, it seems to me, you're constantly going to feel that imposter syndrome a little bit, because you're constantly going to be leveling up and you're going to get into rooms that maybe are a little above your head. And that's okay. If you're doing it right, that's where you want to be, because that's where you're going to get the growth. That's where you're going to get the success. And that's where you get to pick the brains of the people that can truly see you win and get to a point where you're really moving and get the help that you need. And I think, to your point, that dark side of ego, when they get into that spot where they're like, I feel like a fraud. They're so scared of that they will not put themselves in a discomfortable position. I don't even think discomfortable is a word. I just made that up. But they
It
won't put
works.
themselves into a place of discomfort, because they're afraid they'll lose everything that you've built up to that point.
That's right. It's
And
death grip.
it's
It's a
just
death grip.
not, that's just not the way it works, man. Nobody can
Dude.
take that from you. And that's one of the things
Let's
I
have
learned
some
when getting out
fun
the
with
car.
this limited belief. Like you talked about, parents made 48,000 and you're going to make 52. That's a limited belief right there.
Yeah.
And the thing is that's the vast majority of people. That's how I would say middle class America. That's how we're raised, right? Good example is when people come to me and they want to start a company. I say, cool, let's do this. We kind of go through the process and then we get to a financial goal to kind of work backwards from. So what is the financial goal that you have? And I'll shit you not, about 8 out of 10 people, their financial goal is the salary they're currently making at their job. They just
Yeah.
want to replace their income. Like that is how short-sighted they are with their goals. They're, if you're making 80,000 a year and you come in, I mean, I want to make $80,000 for this business. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, where does that number come from? I already know where the answer is. Like, well, that's how much I make today at my job. And it's like, that's the limit of that. You believe that your potential is, you think that that's all you can achieve in your life. Like, why do you believe that? It's because your boss told you that's all you're worth, or the job recruiters told you that's all that you're worth based on the skill sets that you have. Like, you got to realize, like, we're learning new skills and new knowledge here. So let's reset that number and come up with something. And that's funny because they'll be like, okay, $100,000. So again, they're still thinking too
20%, let's
small.
go.
Like, yeah, it's 20%. Like to them, like that's a 20% raise. That's like what
Yeah.
you get when you change companies, right? And so that's one example. Another good example of limited beliefs that I've gone through, and I know you've gone through this too. You may still go through this. Like you and I talked about, we're car guys. We like cars. I want everybody listening to go back and think of cars that were things you wouldn't even drive now, but you really had a big desire for at some point. Like you wanted something so bad, and you got to realize that at that point, that was all that you could afford, but your desire for that thing was really high. Like for me, it would have been like mini trucks with 18-inch woofers in the bed, or maybe a Honda CRX because I could put 15-inch woofers in the back. And you start looking back at this lineage of the car, the progressions of the cars you have. It's always based on what you can little bit stretch and you can a little bit afford. So your desire is really hyper focused on that one car that nowadays you wouldn't even want to be seen in or be driving. So understand that those are also examples of limiting behaviors. Maybe you're into jewelry or looking at watches. You're like, oh man, that $500 watch range is my budget. And you're looking at all the watches in $500 range, and you're finding a few that you're just drooling over. Your desire is really turned up about those things. Then 5 years later, you're looking at $5,000 watches, and you're like, man, I can't believe I was even wearing those, and I had such crazy desire for that, because we create this desire based on what we believe is attainable, when we should be really focused on what do we really want? What does it really take to get what we really want on a personal income level or financial revenue number or material possessions that's going to motivate you? So you got to get away from just limiting yourself. And that's the mindset work that most of us are missing until we start to work with people, like you said, and challenge ourselves.
Yeah. And in racing, you look where you're going, not where you're afraid to go, and I think a lot of people get stuck looking at the wall, hoping they're not going to hit the wall, and they hit the wall, and to your point, this limiting belief system around, I like that analogy, the lineage of the cars we want, or the jewelry we want, or the watches we want, because, when I was in high school, it was an Acura Integra, in 1994
Right.
Acura Integra. I was like, man, that's
Type R,
yeah,
man.
exactly.
Ooh.
Type R, the B-size engine, like, let's
Oh,
go. Like, this
gosh.
is gonna be awesome. And then I got it because my dad was a mechanic. But my dad was also like, you're gonna learn the dignity of hard work. So he'd get me a shell with a crappy engine with all kinds of problems, and he's like, here, now go work on it. Body work needed to be done. He'd give me all the tools and the lessons to do it. So I was very proud of that car. But yeah, like you said, I wouldn't be excited to be driving. I have a 1990 Nissan 240SX in my driveway right now that's in pieces because I
those
built
are
it as a
collectors
dirt car.
again. Damn.
Yeah,
See?
exactly. So it was like, it's one of those things where it's like, I had a BMW. It wasn't serving me. I got the little bit of, I did it, I made it, I got this thing, but now I'm on to bigger, better things. So that thing doesn't serve me anymore because I'm going to get, an Aston Martin Vanquish, or I'm going to get this other car, a Porsche or whatever, right? Like, it has to serve you in the season that you're in. And I think so many of us create an identity and we forget that seasons shift, and they're going to come and they're going to go, and that lineage is going to change. And I recently had this conversation with my best friend, and when he was in high school, his thing was the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. Like, that was
Yeah, that was
his.
my era. Yeah, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was his thing. He was like, I can't wait to have that. And he jokes about it now, where he's like, I can't even believe that I wanted that car. And the other day I was sitting there and we were talking about limiting belief systems. And for me, one of the things that I realized that I had to rewire is my limiting belief system is I don't really care about money. It's never been something that has really caused me to feel like I need to go and chase something. My connection with money is I love to serve my people. I love to serve my friends. And so I sent him a video and I was like, I want to do this for you one day. And it's a video of I think it was some bandmate or something of a band we both follow. And he buys like a 1968 Shelby GT Cobra that this guy had always wanted, and just gifted it to him. It was just like, here, I just love you, brother. I want you to have this. And I sent it to him and I was like, this is why I work the way I do, because I'm going to buy a car for you. Even if it's a joke car, like a 3000 GT, and just be like, here, brother, I know you liked it, and we can have a good laugh about it. Part of getting rid of those limiting belief systems is also auditing what your priorities are. Like, why is it you're seeking that? And that's that point you brought up very early in this call, is that validation factor. What validations are you seeking? Are you seeking personal validation, external validation? Are you looking for status? Are you looking to be able to check a box? Understanding that's really going to help drive getting out of those mechanisms and finding a new level for you to get to, and when you, that metaphor, the lineage of the cars is very critical, because you can plug in, it doesn't have to be cars. It could be houses. It could be, adventures. It could be experiences, whatever that is. If most people get stuck when they hit a certain level and they don't know how to get out of that. And I was like that. When you're in uncharted territories, you're like, I never thought I'd be here. So then they're like, now I'm afraid that it'll go away. You've already made the level.
Yeah.
It's okay to let go. Like, you've already been there. Now find a new level, or find something else that's going to serve you. And that's going to bring you to that next room or that next conversation. And one of the things that I learned very quickly in talking with, in my opinion, the people that I looked up to, Andy, Ed, Sean Whalen, all these people that are growing, Mark Evans, and they're really expanding, is it takes one conversation and everything can change, because it's not about what they can do for you. It's about what you can do for yourself by that one nugget that they give you, that one shift in perspective that lights a fire or turns you on to a new way of thinking or a new way of doing things, or to your point, removes that limiting factor where you're playing at 20% of your capacity and all of a sudden you're at 80 to 100% of your capacity. And now all of a sudden the doors open up for potential.
Yeah. And I think that also, as we start to gain wisdom and we have enough financial success, we start to realize that more is not always better. I've actually had clients that we've downsized their company because they wanted more happiness, more time freedom. And we are misled by a lot of gurus and entrepreneurs, things that are going out there like, oh, you know, you got to be a 7-figure, 8-figure, 9, whatever. They're always throwing figures at you, right?
Mhm.
Revenue, not profit. And realize that the bigger your team gets, the more complex your company gets, the more involved you are, that you're really going back to trading your time again, unless you're really just an investor. You're kind of outside the big picture of that. And so I see so many people that have 8, 9-figure companies that are just stressed out. They look 10 years older than they are. Their kids don't like them because they never see them. Like, there's a lot of trade-offs to have a bigger company unless you do things properly and scale, you know, with the right processes and systems and people. And so what I find is that happiness is not the same for everybody, and it's not always the bigger number. It's like, where were you happy? Like, when you're a business owner, like I'll talk to somebody that's maybe like a $50 million company as a client. And I'll say, at what point during the growth of this company were you the happiest? Can you remember what that era was? And sometimes it's like, man, it was like when we were doing half this. And I was like, okay, was your lifestyle pretty good? Yeah, dude, we had all this stuff and everything and just had more freedom, right? So you start to value your time and your freedom versus trying to brag about your revenue numbers, right? And so that goes again back to ego. And so many people get tied up in entrepreneurship space chasing revenue numbers because they get to brag about it on the internet, or they get introduced like, oh, he's a 7-figure this or 8-figure this or a billion this. And like, dude, none of that shit matters, because to real business owners, we understand that profit margin and actual net profit are far more important and more impressive than your revenue numbers. Because literally, I know 8-figure business owners that make less money than somebody at a food truck on the corner selling tacos. So that guy's making profit. He's actually a better business owner than you, even though your revenue number and you got all these employees. Like, guys, like, it's a game. It's like, it's a machine. Like, the money and the investment and the time that goes in, what comes out, that's what matters to me. Like, I try to make people's profit increase, but also reduce the hours they're working, because I know that's going to make them happier, more fulfilled, and less stressful. So don't get tied up in all the figure stuff that you hear, and understand, like, you know, when people are like, oh, I mean, we sold $1 million in 1 month, like, they sell you that shit, but it's like, dude, but you spent $900,000 on advertising and marketing to do that. So you really netted $100,000. If you really want to whip out your little wee wee, that's what you're really doing. You're throwing the big number at us, try to impress us, but you really just have the little number. Like, somebody that's got a 7-figure company can do that with a high profit margin. They can do that without telling you that they're a $12 million company, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's actually what burned my last attempt at building a business when I was in the apparel business. I lost sight of my measurement of success. I didn't know what my metric of success was. And I was listening to a lot of gurus, and that, you know, theirs was brass tacks, all about how much you're bringing in, how much you're bringing in. And because I started focusing on that, I stopped seeing the mission and the vision that I had for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that equated to lower sales, because I wasn't able to speak to people as the solutioning. I was speaking people from the profits, and that's never good. You lose what made you successful in the beginning. And so what ended up happening is I started looking at it, and Alex Spinoso actually was the one that gave me this tip, as I started looking at it in the time metric, because I was so focused on the money metric.
Mm-hmm.
He started asking more qualifying and audit questions of like, well, how much time are you spending here and there? Yeah. And I was spending like 24 to 35 hours per pop-up to make $30.
Yeah.
You know, and he's like, that's all well and good. Like, I'm glad you made the $30, but at the end of the day, it's not serving you. It's not serving you at all. So how do you shift that system? And by that point, I had already fallen down that path of losing sight of the mission and the metrics, that I wasn't able to bring it back. And we had 4 physical locations, and we had online sales, and it was all well and good. But once, for me, being a passion driver, money's not really my metric, I wasn't serving anymore. And once I wasn't serving, I didn't care. So, you know, it's not just, like you said, it's not just the money, but it's about what metric are you using to define your success. Because if it's you know, a lot of people, the kind of the fun statement right now, or the cliche statement now, is money is freedom. Well, for some people, yeah. But if your metric isn't really time and freedom, then you don't even know your number. Like, you don't even know what that is. And Ryan Stewman talks about that as well, as like, what's your number? What's your dream number? You ask somebody how much they want to make, and they're like, I want to make $1 million. It's like, why? How did you come up with that number? I don't know. Society said 1 million is a good number.
Yeah.
But if you break it down on, you know, how much you want to spend, how much time you want to work, what kind of house you have, cars, family time, how much you want to travel, etc., then you get a more realistic number. And a lot of times most people can be happy making, you know, 250 to 500,000 a year and be completely content. And their life is like the pinnacle of, you know, happiness for them. Whereas some people, they have a little bit higher of a need, and they want to, you know, like my need for money is more like how much I can serve. So the more money we make, the more things we can do. We can host events, we can go and do these things, we can have fun and create experiences for people, because my whole heart is in adventuring. Like, I love adventures. I love being out there and doing stuff. And I love sharing that with people. Like, for me, a big part of my love of adventures is because that's how I connect with my friends. We go and we do something, and then we talk about it for years, in the space of like, when are we doing that again? Let's go do that again. I want to bring that to the table. So to your point, define your metrics and stay aligned with your metrics to make sure you're getting out of it what you set out to get out of it. Because for me, just speaking personally, it burned my last business down because of that, because I
Yeah,
lost
I
sight.
agree. I agree. I think memories and experiences are more valuable than materials. I think that when you don't have materials, it's something to aspire to. There's nothing wrong with that, but realize that if you're not spending time to go on vacation or create those memories or those experiences, those are the things that you're really going to look back on fondly. And you think about this, is that every memory that we have that we can really vividly think about is rooted in an emotion. So the good memories and the bad memories, we're always rooted in emotion. There's got to be some emotional moment. And those happen far more often in an experiential or setting where you're visiting things and seeing things and feeling that emotion versus just buying shit. Because we buy shit all the time. Like, if that's our habit, we buy shit all the time. It's cool for a day or two, and then a week it starts to fade, and a month later you're just kind of like, it's in your routine. You don't even really think about it. There's not really an emotion there anymore. So I think that a lot of times people focus too many things on the material because it looks good on Instagram and they want to flex and things like that. That's, like I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I had to go through that. I still have all that shit. People just don't see it all the time. Now, it doesn't mean as much to me. Like, now you see my Instagram, like, we're traveling the world, we're doing crazy stuff, we're always doing something interesting. And that's more fulfilling and more fun to me, is just like traveling and seeing the world. And you talked about happiness and money. I don't believe are linked, because I've worked in Africa for months and I've been to third world countries, and I understand that people are people, and that regardless of where their financial situation is, if that's their norm, they're actually happy, they're resilient, they're laughing, they're dancing, they're still having a good time because they don't know any better. So that's a distinct correlation, that money and happiness are not related. And there's a good song that I hear in country music, Kenny Chesney, I don't know the title, but he talks about, he's a businessman on a trip in Mexico, and he sees a guy that just fishes and sells fish, and he's like, and he's telling the fisherman, like, I'm super important where I come from, and that's how I can afford to come here. And like, he's kind of feeling all good about himself. And he's like, well, how do you do it? He's asking the fisherman. The fisherman's like, man, I fish, I play my guitar, I hang out with my friends, and I sing at night, and then every day I get to do it all over again. And the guy's happy, and he realizes in that song is like, dude, this guy's got it figured out. Like, he's way happier than me, and he's broke. Like, so, find out what makes you happy and hold on to that. It's not always about the financial stuff.
No, I love that. And I want to be respectful of your time. That's a great place to kind of segue into the close of this episode. You brought a lot of great pieces of tool sets for people to really start breaking those limiting belief systems, and start identifying, what those metrics look like for themselves. So before I let you go, is there any like quick tips that you would like to just add on to this conversation that you'd like to leave and impart on people that may have gotten to this point in the episode?
Man, I would say that the biggest piece of wisdom that I really didn't start fully focusing on until I was in my 40s, so about 10 years now, is just really not giving a fuck what people think or say about what you do. Because we spend too much of our lives with these optics and trying to impress people or make them like us or be likable, or we don't want to rock the boat and things like that. And guys, realize that the people that don't support you, the naysayers, the haters, the critics that you have now, that they're always going to be around. You're never going to outgrow them. They exist at every single financial level. I know millionaires that are fucking haters, right? So you're not going to out earn, people that are like that. It's just realize that if your intentions are good, you're not a dirt bag and you're actually doing things with good intentions. Just keep on your path and quit giving those negative people so much attention. Just create literal boundaries. Like, don't be around those people. Remove them from your social media. Quit answering their calls. Quit telling me you'll take a rain check to go hang out with those people. Just distance yourself those people, and it's going to drastically change your life. Because, like I said, if you're doing things and you're making noise and you're starting to grow, you're always going to have naysayers, haters, and critics are always going to appear. I would say 5% of the people in your space are always going to be like that, no matter what. Quit giving that 5% of those people too much attention and focus on the 95% that are okay with you or they do support you, and just keep growing, because that's just the way it is. And until you learn that, you're always going to be held back worrying about what people think or say about you. And that's going to severely limit your potential.
Awesome. 1000%. 1000%. I agree with that. That's something that I've experienced the last couple of years. They're always going to be there no matter where you're at. So thank you, Tony, so much for pouring into our audience, pouring into me. This has been an absolute pleasure for myself. Like I said, I've been following your journey for a while, and it's been nothing short of amazing to sit down and be able to talk with you and get the amount of value that you've brought to the episode. So thank you so much for spending the time with us. And as always, if you like the content, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll make sure that Tony's information gets down there. Be sure to pick up his book. Be sure to follow him. You definitely won't regret it. So we'll check you next time on the Heroes Veritas podcast. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, brother.
Your spirit.